Okay, so welcome everyone to the London School of Paediatrics. They're hosting START Prep Evening for everyone who's sitting the START Heat in October. We are joined by a lovely panel of people today. We've got Dr. Sue Laurent, who is a paediatrician consultant, as well as Dr. Anna Pute and Dr. Jane Runnacles, who are our consultant panel. And they'll be giving us a little bit of their wisdom on the START preparation, how to prepare for it. And then Kate Quinnen and Abby Fernando have recently sat START and will be also sharing their pearls of wisdom as what it's like being on the other side and sitting it. So thank you all. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and get to them as and when. But if you don't need to have your mic on, then please mute it just so that there's no feedback from the speakers. Thank you. Take it away. I think Dr. Sue Laurent, you're going to start first.
Thank you very much. And I can say everything I know and then I can hand over the rest to everybody else. So I just wanted to say that thank you very much for pulling together an evening, because I think as a group of trainees, it's quite nice to know what to expect. And when we first started doing START, and I've been doing it since right at the very beginning, we just threw you straight in. And now having a little bit of an idea about what's going to happen is really helpful. START, really, I just want to emphasize this, is all about you preparing to become a consultant and really assessing where you are in those skills that you can't learn very easily from books. So there's leadership, management, team working type skills, the sort of scenarios, the real life scenarios. And in fact, the scenarios that you will be doing are all scenarios that people like me have sent in because they've thought they've been doing something at work, they've been in a situation, they thought, that would be a really good START scenario. And so we've got a massive bank of them, and we all get allocated the scenarios. And they won't necessarily be a scenario that's from our area of expertise. It'll just be we each get given, this is what you're doing this time. And we do the same scenario again and again and again. And the idea is it's something that will sort of help us assess where you are on that journey to developing those consultant skills. What we expect is that it will be quite an interactive session. You'll do most of the talking. And we will be, we'll have sort of 8 minutes in each session where we're doing the talking, and then we're given 4 minutes to write down our summary of our assessment of you. And actually, the majority of the stations, the majority of you will find quite straightforward. I hope this is what Kate and Abby are also going to say. So we're not really trying to catch you out. We're just trying to give you a situation to think about and chat with us. And there's always going to be a safeguarding kind of question. And there's always going to be a sort of a transfer of information and a sort of a handover-y type thing and a prescribing-y type thing and maybe taking back a child from an intensive care unit, having a conversation and a teaching scenario. They're all the kinds of things that you do and that we do in our everyday life. And for me as a START assessor, the most complicated bit is the IT. So I've done it every single time. And what happens along the way is you get taught what to do, we get reminded what to do, but every so often you'll get stuck somewhere, or we'll get stuck somewhere, or your Wi-Fi will give up on you or us. And we have got the phone number of every single one of you. So if within 30 seconds of when I'm supposed to be seeing my candidate, I'm not seeing you, I'm going to be phoning you. And it's up to us to phone you. So make sure you've got the right phone next to you. And we'll phone you. And then we'll just have that conversation on the phone. You will not be disadvantaged. We will just do it on the phone. So don't panic if everything goes wrong Wi-Fi wise. I mean, mostly I've done it every single time so far, virtually, and I'm a real dinosaur in terms of all of this, and mostly it's been fine. So it is, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So I'm going to stop talking now and ask you, do we want to take questions as we go along, or do we want Anne to go next, or Jane to go next? What do you think?
I think it depends. I think maybe if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat for Dr. Sue Laurent.
And I can't easily see the chat, so if somebody could tell me what's happening in the chat, that would be really good.
Yes, we know you need to leave, so if there's anything specifically for Sue, maybe we'll do that first, and then we'll get Anne and Jane.
While we're thinking of questions, I just wanted to say that this whole thing, START, was devised because we were told by the GMC that all specialty trainees needed to have exit exams, and everyone had to come up with an exit exam in inverted commas. And we thought, in paediatrics, you've done enough exams, you don't want any more exams. Why don't we come up with an exit assessment, which is not pass or fail? And we use the word assessors and assessment the whole time, because it's not an exam, and use it for you. It's for you to know where you are and in what way you might need to remediate in some areas in your final year, so that you've got everything ticked by the time you get to the end. The platform that we're using does use the word exam and examiner in it. But please don't be put off by that, because we are not examining you, we are assessing you. Any questions?
I have a question for you, just in terms of the feedback that people get given in their START assessment. Do you think that becomes quite good material for consultant interview questions, or is it something that's not really looked at?
Well, I think that the preparation that I found that my trainees, the sort of preparation they've done for START, so kind of thinking about some of these issues, has been really, really helpful for consultant interviews. And the sessions that they do, if there are areas that they thought, I haven't really thought about that yet, and it came up in START, then it's really so yeah, it's all useful stuff, I would say.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, well, I don't think that there's anything at the moment. Maybe people are still thinking through their questions. So we will let you go and say thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. And yeah, hopefully see you again soon.
I'll see some of you at START.
Yes.
So now you're going to have the gin with the tonic.
The gin with the tonic, exactly. And you will all be able to do that when you've finished. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Anna Pute, would you be able to give us some of your words of wisdom, please?
Hi, everyone. I think I'm just going to mostly answer questions, but I thought that I would just reiterate some of the things that Sue has said, and then just expand on this. So START, most of you will know, stands for Specialty Training Assessment of Readiness for Tenure, which is not a UK term. So tenure is a kind of Americanism that we've kind of, because we needed to make it all kind of sound really lovely. But basically, it's assessment of where you are on that journey to becoming a consultant, because once you step into the training program, that is what you engage in. You engage in a journey, no matter how long or abbreviated it might be, or stop-start, whatever it is, but you are heading towards becoming a consultant. And as Sue said, it's just kind of understanding where trainees are. We used to do in London, we used to do an ST7 kind of informal, well, it was meant to be informal, but it was linked with the ARCP, which unfortunately made it formal. But we used to see all ST7 trainees because, we thought penultimate year, we want to see how you're doing, what's the higher level skills, how are you catching up on those, what are your career aims, how can we help you, that kind of thing. And sadly, as things got busier, we'd kind of drop that formal kind of, or inviting all ST7s. But but this is a nice way of trying to assess where you are on, in terms of readiness for that. So it started, as Sue said, quite a little while ago. It's not an exam, and I always say this. My trainees always kind of go, because when I took my exam, I'm like, no, it's not an exam, it's an assessment. And not only is it an assessment, it's not actually a summative assessment. It's a formative assessment. So it's saying, where are you in terms of all these various stations and how they've assessed you. And what's really good is that the assessors have to come up with not just sort of telling you how you did as a trainee, but also how you can close the gaps, if there are any gaps. If you did really well, that's fantastic. But even when you've done really well, it's like, maybe you want to kind of just brush up on this or do a bit of that to kind of just make you even stronger in that area. And I think someone asked a question, didn't you? I think, Merit, you asked about consultant interviews. Not necessarily consultant interviews, but, your career aims, your career trajectory. Sometimes that, you do start and you realize that actually people have been telling me I'm really strong in this area, and look, it's come out, and maybe this is an area, education and training, that teaching, the feedback I got from my assessors was fantastic. So maybe this is something I really want to pursue. So sometimes it kind of just helps you in terms of your career projection and aims. But sometimes it's the other way. It's the other way around, where you might have thought that things were okay then, and then it just opened up your eyes to actually it's a little bit more than I thought, and maybe I thought I was a good communicator, but maybe this might help me be a bit better, that kind of thing. So it really is based on mostly generic skills. So the skills that all of us as consultants, whether you're a geriatrician, a pediatrician, or a surgeon, need to have. The GMC, as you know, is sort of with progress curriculum, all our specialties have to have a lot of generic and higher level skills ingrained in them, and START has that. There are some scenario specific stations, but very few and far between. So the things that everybody needs to be able to do as a consultant, critical appraisal. So how do you know to get the evidence? You're dealing with a patient. How do you know to check the latest evidence and see whether it's applicable to your patient population, maybe that individual patient you're dealing with that week, or a group of patients, that kind of thing. So critical appraisal, safe prescribing. Everybody needs to know how to prescribe safely. Ethical stations, so ethical situations. We're all going to be thrown into that as trainees, as consultants, and particularly as consultants, you're kind of the last line of the defense, as I call it. So like everyone's tried the whole whatever, and they go, well, let's call the consultant, and so that's going to be you. And what skills do you want to employ to be able to deal with some of those tricky situations that we deal with, quite frankly, more and more now. And then handover. We are dealing, we're now working, we work in teams, but now we have many people working in those teams. We're handing over within teams, and we're handing over from team to team. We're handing over from hospital to hospital. And how do you deal with the complexities of handover and ensuring that your patient care is safeguarded? And then a safeguarding, which all of us as pediatricians, in fact, not just pediatricians, as doctors, you need to safeguard adults and children, so mainly children, but don't be surprised one day they might throw in a safeguarding adult into the mix. I do that as part of my StatMan at work. And the first time I did safeguarding adults, I kind of thought, what the heck? But when I did the module, I realized actually how important it is. And we've had some parents on our neonatal unit with learning difficulties, and how we safeguard them and ensure that actually that we're meeting their needs as them as well as parents. So that's quite important. And then you have the scenario-based discussions that will differ as to whether you're a subspecialty trainee or whether you're a general pediatrician. So that's kind of the kind of things. I know people kind of say, oh, it's an exam, I need to study for the exam, but it's not. It's not an exam, it's an assessment. And if you want to start to study for it, maybe start to look at consultants that you admire, that you think are good clinicians on the floor. And what is, just kind of shadow them or kind of, look over their shoulders and see how do they communicate, how do they deal with that how did they deal with that very tricky situation when, you know, everybody was throwing their toys out of the pram, and then that consultant came and was able to actually resolve the situation satisfactorily on both sides, you know. And it's like, that's fantastic. How did they do that? And just kind of learning those things, I think day by day is perhaps a more useful thing than going, I know the college run a course or an evening, and I think that's great. That's not this evening, is it? No, okay, so they run a specific a station, and people want to know about critical appraisal, and I think that's great. But actually, if you do journal clubs as part of your teaching program, which we do at the Royal London, you know, you should, you know, kind of link into that and actually run one of those. Use a clinical situation. So we had a baby recently that was very kind of atypical, and then going to, you know, to the literature and looking at this particular drug, and that's kind of, you know, that was critical appraisal, and then sharing the papers with your colleagues, and actually you could put that in your e-portfolio and say that, well, that's, you know, that's how I you know, what was important, the sort of simple things like the sample, the population, and a few statistical tests that you and I will probably need to be aware of, that maybe once you start practicing, I've completely forgotten all about that sensitivity, specificity, and all of that. Maybe just kind of brushing up on that. I have a little book, I can see it now somewhere sitting on my desk, that's Statistics Made Simple. I have that nearby because quite frankly, I'm not, it doesn't come kind of natural to me. I'm not that inquisitive, and I don't have that kind of brain. I'm more a pragmatist rather than a theorist. So you want to kind of just, you know, read up that. Safeguarding, well, it's all the principles of safeguarding, nothing new. And it's just really trying to think, I am the consultant when you're in those scenarios, rather than, you know, you're acting up, as it were. So this is me, I'm a first year consultant and I've got the situation. What do I have to do? Because I can't go to anybody else. Well, you can, but this sort of buck stops with me kind of thing. And who do I need, and what do I need to do to be able to safeguard this child and deal with it? And just take a minute to kind of, it helps if you can act and imagine yourself, you know, in that role, because that's what they want to see. That is the landmark, or the comparison is my new consultant colleague who has just started, and what do I expect them to be able to do, and how do I expect them to be able to manage the situation? And just think about calling, you know, for backup and colleagues. I think people forget that. Hopefully you work in good teams where you see that consultants lean on each other, and it's okay to do that. It's just that you need to have some format, some framework that you're working to, and to be able to say, well, this sounds a little bit tricky, so I'm going to do this, but I think I will speak to some of my colleagues who may have had more experience or a different experience, so that we can put it all together and deal with the situation, because this is really quite tricky, that kind of thing. So yeah, I think I'll stop there, and I can then talk about, or maybe I should talk about the feedback. The feedback now is great, and hopefully, I don't know who's just taken START, but I think it's a lot better than it used to be. We used to pull our hair out at ARCP panels trying to understand, you know, what the scenarios were, the feedback. But I think it's a lot more supportive and developmental for the trainee, and it's easy for the educational supervisor and the ARCP panels to see and understand what the scenario was and what the feedback was. So I think it's a win-win. The only thing that we're missing, and I complained to the college, is the graph. That we love the graph, kind of just so you could see where, you know, just as a glance, without reading a very long, detailed assessment feedback, which I think the educational supervisor should sit down and do with the trainee. But for ARCP panels and stuff, we just want to get a summary, and I've been told they're going to put that back in now. So it's really useful to do that. And so you reflect on your assessment feedback. We say reflection and remediation, but I think it's really just reflection. I think everybody should reflect. It's an incredibly important assessment. And so you want to make it work for you. So you want to reflect on it. the good parts, the not so good parts, the developmental parts, the part where you didn't realize just how good you were, and the parts that you kind of affirmed that actually those are your strengths. So you want to do that, and the college now gives you a framework to do that. And we want to see that at ARCP. We want to see that you have reflected on it. We also want to see that you have discussed this with your education supervisor and agreed what your developmental points are, what your strengths are, where you might have gaps that you need to close, certainly close before you complete training, or start to close, because you may never completely close them. We never stop training, really, do we? But start to close. And we say, finally, for the ARCP panel, just because some of us are getting quite old, and it can be quite difficult to find stuff in ePortfolios, that you please have a start folder attached to your ARCP folder, so that we can very readily see for the ST7 and 8 trainees what their start assessments are. So we can actually see that you've done start, because a few weeks after you've done it, it will come onto your ePortfolio, but we want to see that reflection folder. One more thing I was going to say is, ideally, when to take start, we say in your ST7 year, perhaps in the latter part of the ST7 year. But as you know, with COVID, everything's gone out the window now. So we do have trainees who unfortunately are taking it in the ST8 year. But we hope that you have a few months at least to be able to reflect, not in a rush, and actually try to close the gaps that you might have prior to your final ARCP. So that's it, really. I'll take any questions.
Great, thank you so much. So there are a few questions coming through. Someone has said, can you get a fail, and would you ever need to resit?
No. So, well, interesting. It's not an exam, so you can't fail or pass. So not an exam. I want to stress that. But you know, you'll get you know, so say the assessor will say you performed well above standard, below standard, expected standard. And obviously, if it's below standard, then that's a bit of a worry. We have had situations where whilst it's not an exam, it's still a professional assessment, and if there's anything that comes up that is worrying, then that will be raised to the head of school for that particular trainee to say, look, we were concerned, and this happened. It's very rare, but this happened 2 years ago. And we just sat with the trainee and we worked on several things. It was to do with communication and team working, and there were some red flags. And actually, it wasn't new. It wasn't a surprise, because when you looked at ePortfolio, it was things that had been raised. And to her credit, she worked with the solutions that were offered to her, and CCT'd successfully. And knows that it's something that she needs to continue to work on, and she'll do so. So it's not a pass fail, but there might be times when we think, gosh, we need to really support this trainee in their development, and then we kind of highlight those. I saw a question about whether this is whether your future potential employers can see. Your employers have no access to your ePortfolio. Nobody has access to your ePortfolio but yourself, the college, and your school. And even within the school, it's your education supervisor at the time, the heads of school, the training program directors, so the LSP, and not everyone in the LSP, just setting people. And the minute you CCT, say, for instance, I cannot visualize the ePortfolio of a trainee who CCT'd in March this year. So as soon as you've got your CCT, you're no longer an active trainee. Your ePortfolio is no longer, it becomes historical. So if we have to do anything, so we have a trainee who was abroad who wanted to get some letter to say that their training had gone so and so. So, we didn't have those records. So we needed the ePortfolio. So we go to the college, and for those specific situations, they'll give us access for a day or two, something like that. So no one has access to your ePortfolio. you and the people that need to.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's really, I think for lots of people that feels a lot more comfortable. Roughly, do you know how long it takes for the feedback to come back?
Well, it's been taking shorter and shorter, luckily. Sometimes I'm pulling my hair out trying to desperately look at that, because whilst it's not a prerequisite for fast tracking to CCT, it's quite important, especially if the trainee is fast tracking, you know, a whole year or something like that. It's quite important that we know that their start was satisfactory. It kind of just helps us in making that decision. So it can take up to 6 weeks, but I think it's taking a bit shorter now that things are a little bit, I wouldn't say normal. The new normal is becoming established, and it's shorter now. But you know, sometimes the trainee kind of, I can see they probably, I don't know if you get an email or something, but on ePortfolio it seems to take about 4 to 6 weeks before we can see it.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then there was a question that's asking, is the critical appraisal different this year because we're getting it 5 days in advance?
I'm not sure, probably. I don't know. I don't know the specifics. I have to say that I have never been a start assessor. And I kind of lost the interest a few years ago. They'd asked me then, and maybe I would have done it. So I kind of see it from the other side, is in preparing trainees and also from the ARCPs. Probably, but I don't think it would make any difference. I think you just want to really understand how critical appraisal is used on a day-to-day basis and equip yourself with those kind of simple tools, understanding simple statistical terminology.
Yeah.
It'd be easier if it's 5 days before, but
Kate and Abby can probably tell us about what happened last time.
I think it's the same format, and I think that they really think they've got a winning format now, so there are no plans to change them as far as the immediate future goes, because they think that it actually is working well. Be interesting to find out from the trainees who've just done it if that's necessarily the case. But the assessors seem to think so, the college seems to think so. It's a very expensive exam, or sorry, assessment. Say exam, assessment. So it is important, actually. I think that there's value for money. A business case. I haven't seen that scenario. I've just been looking at one of my trainees who's just done it recently, and there wasn't anything about that. But I think that that's quite an important thing to be involved in as a senior trainee, because honestly, I just got an email today about a new college tutor in St. Elsewhere, and you know, 6 months ago she was my trainee, so I'm feeling a little bit sorry for her. But that's what happens when you come into a department that's busy, is that they just kind of go, here you go, and someone will go, we've been really looking to increase our number of junior doctors, you know, Fatima, I want you to do this business case. And all of a sudden you're like, and then you say, if you say no, you kind of think, am I being, well, I actually think you should be empowered to say no, but unfortunately that's not always possible. So you get kind of lumbered with these things, and no one ever actually, you know, the managers are there to kind of work with you, as it were, but you end up doing 90% of it, and then they take the credit for all of it. But that's just the way it works.
Thank you. And Jane, I was just wondering, in terms of, so the QI side of things, just in terms of us developing ourselves as future consultants, are there any kind of resources that you would say are really important for us to kind of get our teeth sunk into in preparation for consultant line?
Okay, well, I was going to say that, sorry, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jane Runnacles. I'm a paediatrician at St George's, and I'm one of the TPDs for education. And traditionally in this course, I've talked about quality improvement, and those of you who know me will know it's my my big interest. And I was actually just looking on the YouTube channel for the School of Paediatrics, the start evening in August 2020. there is a talk I did called A Crash Course for Paediatric Trainees on Quality Improvement, and it's from 1 hour 44 into the recording, and it does go through some of the tools that might be useful to mention in your START assessment if there's a station around service improvement, quality improvement, even for building a business case. So I won't sort of go through all of that, but what I would say is if you can hang it on some sort of structural framework, it kind of shows that you've got some understanding, or at least you've got some experience. And we do run a fantastic program, which I can shamelessly plug now, the QI Change Champions program, twice a year. And we do have a few spaces left if you're super quick. The closing date is going to be this weekend, this Monday. And I'd highly recommend it for level 3 trainees to really start to understand quality improvement. It's one of the best things I learned as a trainee that I've applied as a consultant. And actually it would really help you for the START assessment if you get that sort of station. But essentially, I mean, one of the most common quality improvement methodologies that we teach on this program is called the Model for Improvement. It's developed by the IHI, which is, you know, in the States, but it's the one recognised by the NHS as the kind of framework that you can use for thinking about improvement or service development. And the kind of key aspects to that, if you don't get around to looking it up, the kind of take home messages are really, number one, understand your problem. So if you get a station that asks you about even about responding to an incident or a complaint or building your service or developing something, is firstly really try to get to grips with what the issue is. And for that you may need data, and you may need to ask the right people for data. So think outside of your department. As a consultant, you'd kind of learn that, a bit more about how the NHS ticks or how it doesn't work and how data isn't available, but thinking about who to go to, and actually going to your service manager or your general manager, and if they're not able to provide you with some of that data, thinking about how you as a department or a team might be able to collect the data or get hold of some data from outside of your immediate department. So first of all, understanding the problem. And then the model for improvement. Everybody knows about PDSA, and that's all that everybody ever remembers when I ask them about the model for improvement. But actually the most important bit of the model for improvement are the 3 questions that go before PDSA, which is simplified as AIM, measures, change ideas. So AIM is what you're trying to achieve. Measures is how you know that a change is an improvement, and change ideas is what changes can you make. And we call that change ideas because actually it's not, interventions is a bit American, and actually you could test these changes out on a very small scale before you actually implement them. So once you get change ideas, you can test them out and on a very, very small scale as a PDSA cycle, which might just be with 1 patient in 1 clinic on 1 day. So that's whizzing through it. If you want to hear a bit more about the model for improvement, I think I do talk about it in that presentation, which is on the YouTube recording. And I'm happy to take questions about the model for improvement. But what I suppose my next point, and I've probably only got 2 more points to make, and then I'll hand over to the trainees because I think you'll get much more from those who've actually done the assessment. I just missed out on it, which is a pity for me, because actually there was a lot of stuff that would have been nice to have known before as a consultant, but there are some benefits to START, trust me. So my other points are about structuring your answers. Try and build it on some, take a few minutes to gather your thoughts. I do a lot of kind of interview prep with people who've got consultant interviews. And I remember myself thinking that actually how you actually get the message across is really important. You may perfectly well know all the stuff that you need to know for your START assessment, but a lot of it is how you present yourself and how you answer the questions effectively. So I would say, if you can do some sort of practice, but at least in your head, have a little structure for answering things. So for each station, map out in your mind kind of 3 main things you should cover, and think about examples of stations. So, you know, if there's medical error, remember to mention duty of candour, remember to hang it on a kind of framework of how you would go about responding to an error or a complaint. The same goes for if you've got a QI or a safety issue or a service development or business case, think of the 3 key points you want to get across. It might be about really understanding the issue and how you get more data. It might be about how you measure your outcomes or show your improvement, and it might be about how you test out changes and improvements to kind of before you actually sort of set the stone. And as we say, you know, lamination's the enemy of QI, so never say that you're going to implement this guideline and laminate it on the wall and tell everyone to do it, because that just doesn't work. So, you know, there's a way of kind of answering these questions, and that goes for all the different stations. And if you've got that in your head, you know, I know what it's like when you're nervous, you'll forget what you're going to say. I'm already beginning to forget now what my other 2 points were that I was going to tell you, but I will tell you 2 more points in a minute. So use that, and in terms of your preparation, this is my second point. As Anne said, you know, talk to consultants, talk to people within your team, but go to them with specific kind of questions or advice. You might go to, you know, you might come to me to ask about how to answer a QI type question, but I certainly wouldn't be the consultant you should come and discuss the critical appraisal question with. But go and find someone who you think, oh, actually, they might be able to explain this really easily to me, so I've got a bit more depth of an understanding, you know, or take an example along and say, can we talk about how I'd answer this, or can I try out my answer with you? So pick people who can help you prepare, so talk to people. And my second point is about talking to trainees who've done the assessment, and we all know that, you know, you'll get a much richer understanding of this rather than listening to us. So I'm really glad that you've got some trainees talking to you next. And then my third point is, and I'm forgetting this now, is actually use this assessment to plan your focus for ST7 or 8, because actually we've talked about this in a little bit, but actually if you know your weak spot is around QI, then sign up to our program. You know, you can actually cover the program in about 16 weeks. So it's totally feasible to do that as part of your ST7 or 8 and get a really high quality QI project out of it. And likewise, if you know your weaknesses are elsewhere, you might want to actually plan some study leave around one of the other topics, because they are genuinely things that will come up when you're a consultant, so it's worth preparing for them. And as Sue said, actually they are really helpful in preparing for consultant interview, because these are sort of questions that might come up. I think that's about all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand back to you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you so much. I can't see any questions in the chat, and I don't think I can see anyone who's got their hands up. So we'll say thank you ever so much to Dr. Anna Priday and Dr. Jane Runnacles for your time. We really appreciate it. And we'll hand over now to Abby and Kate for their perspectives as people who've just run it on the online format. So thanks, and over to you guys.
So, hi everyone. Kate and I are both SD8s who sat START recently. So I sat the first virtual sitting in October last year, and Kate just sat it in spring. So I'll give you a little overview, and Kate, please chip in as well. And Kate will give you more of an overview of the recent running of the circuit, which is a little bit hazy to me. But I just wanted to reiterate what Anne and Sue and
Kate, maybe take over.
Yeah, I was going to say, I wasn't sure if it was my internet or Abby's. Yeah, as Abby said, I'm Kate. I'm also a registrar. I'm actually a general PEDS registrar, but I think this is applicable for anyone, whether you're doing your specialty or not. And I just sat it in spring. So the things I wanted to really cover are kind of preparation for it, because I did get stressed. Everyone keeps saying, don't they, it's not an exam, it's not an exam. But look, we're all perfectionist paediatricians, and I got stressed about it. And the way I know that helps me manage my stress is to feel like I've done some preparation. So what I did do is I found some kind of colleagues who were doing the exam with me, and we formed a study group, which was actually really fun. We called it Start and Wine, and we usually met virtually in the evenings with a drink in hand. And we kind of used it for two things, really. We used it, first of all, to kind of come up with a framework for how to kind of answer the questions. So first of all, we looked at some examples on the RCPCH website. There are some examples of kind of previous questions, and we looked at those, and between us we kind of came up with a framework of how we thought we'd want to answer them, because you don't have very long. You have 4 minutes to prepare and 8 minutes to answer. So again, just we came up a bit like Jane was just saying, we kind of tried to come up with this idea of trying to cover 3 main points when we were answering the questions. And then we just practiced with each other, and importantly, kind of practiced to time, and then would feed back to each other. So one of us would practice being the examiner, and someone would be the candidate, and we'd actually try and run it to time. So I had my study group. I did watch the YouTube video, which is on the LSP channel, which has already been mentioned. So the one from last August is really good. It is 3 hours long, but it's super, and it just gives you so much information and kind of covers all of the stations. So really do watch that. Some of the details of kind of number of stations or maybe timings might not be that up to date, but all of the kind of content is really relevant. Do sign up to the Trello board. I don't know if Katie can maybe put the link in the chat here, but that was super. It's kind of been run by trainees, so people who have done START, who've gone, oh, this is a really useful resource, and uploaded it to the Trello board. It can seem a little bit overwhelming when you first see it. You don't need to know all of it, but it's just a really good resource. I kind of look back to it now. Sometimes it's got some good stuff there. So I had to look at that. And then finally, found a really nice consultant who did some practice sessions with us, which was really good because it made it a little bit more stressful and maybe a little bit more real. So that was kind of the revision prep, I guess I did. And the rest of it, I think in terms of knowledge, you actually, I'm sure Abby would agree, you know it, everything you need to know already. For me, it was the practicalities more I needed help with. They're kind of coming up with a structure and getting used to answering questions in the time. But actually everything else felt really relevant. And if I didn't know it, it was stuff I really should know. So it kind of finally gave me a kind of kick on to go and read all the stuff. I keep going, oh, I must read that. I must read that.
I would totally agree with Kate. You already know how to answer most of these things, and the really good thing about the Trello board is it can just help fill in any gaps you've got, because it's got a whole host of really useful resources which are good just for general preparation consultant life. So don't, as Kate said, get overwhelmed by the amount of information there. Just look up the things you need to for where you have some gaps in information. And otherwise, you know the material that you're going to need to cover. Sorry for my technical fail. That's a good example of what happened through half of my START exam, actually. So I just wanted to reiterate that don't worry too much about the virtual format. It probably is running even better this time around because it'll be the third cycle. The RCPCH are really organised about it. They do a lovely kind of webinar presentation a few weeks before that's recorded, where they talk you through the setup and show you what it looks like. You get access to the online platform about a week or two before as well, so you can play around with it and get familiar. And then you get sent all of your kind of the timings and order of your stations. a few days before, so you can know what your structure is going to look like. I don't know if you already talked about timings, Kate.
No, I can talk about them now because I think they changed them a bit for my my rotation.
No, I'm doing it like this.
Oh.
Brilliant.
Sorry, yeah. So they changed it a bit for my rotation. So when I did it, I had 10 stations. I think previously it used to be 12. So we had 10 stations. And one of the key changes they made for us was that they made the prescribing station a double length station, which was really helpful because people had always been really rushed for time for that before. And then the other thing they did, which was great, is they actually built in a break. So you have a half-hour break in the middle of your circuits, which is fantastic because you talk a lot and you just need a drink and you need to just not be staring at the screen and maybe stretch your legs. So I think those were the kind of the changes that they made for us. And they sought a lot of feedback from us. So there might be a few kind of tweaks. So that therefore meant for me, I had, as I said, I'm a general paediatrician, so I had 3 scenario-based discussions, which were kind of general paediatrics kind of based. So obviously, if you're doing a specialty, those will be your specialty things. So that's 3. I think previously it used to be 4. And then you have 4 minutes of prep time, and then 8 minutes to kind of start talking, and the timings are quite tight, so they send you all the timings. And I stole this idea from Abby and it was brilliant. I made a timetable, so I felt I'm actually going to show you. I felt a bit like I went to school, but that's what I did. So I made myself a little timetable with all my timings, because they're not neat timings. It's all a bit odd. It's 14:53 you need to disconnect, but again, I'm someone who likes to prepare, and it made me feel calmer knowing I had that. And I downloaded a stopwatch app, like a kind of multi-timer app, to my phone as well, which again just meant I could kind of press start and stop, because the examiners or assessors, sorry, they're also, you and they are in charge of the time. And people said to me before, oh, it's like having a chat with their consultants. And I thought, no way. But it is. And we suddenly, like, you're mid-chat with somebody, having actually, I had a laugh with some of them in the middle of it. And you suddenly realise that time is running away from you. So have your timer there and have your timetable. That really helped me.
Yeah, I think that's the most useful logistical thing that someone else recommended to me.
Well, there you go. I've given you the credit there, Abby.
So that is a really good practical tip for the day, and just having like some water and a snack or something near you, because it is quite draining and exhausting. I'm glad they put a longer break in, because I think we just had a station's length break, so it felt quite exhausting. And just to go back to some of the questions in the chat, with the critical appraisal, we did get sent the paper, I think it was about 5 days beforehand, and you actually get the scenario clinical question as well. So that's a station that you can fully prepare for. So I think don't worry too much about critical appraisal, which I know worries me. Us, and it would have done previously if we had to do it on the spot. I think it would have been one of my most worrisome stations, but you can prepare it beforehand. So use like a critical appraisal tool, like CASP or NIH. They will have them for the different types of studies, and just prepare what you would say. Practice it in 8 minutes, because 8 minutes actually is not very long, so you'll find you can't go into much statistical detail anyway. It's just an overview, and I'd say make sure that you answer the clinical question. It's always linked to a clinical scenario, so answer that, relate it to your own practice, and don't get too bogged down in the statistical side of it. You are doing that as well, but always link it back to the question and real life.
I think that's key, isn't it? It's because particularly having it advanced, you can, at first I was writing reams. I was using my CASP UK tool, and I wrote reams, and I thought, hang on a minute, this is going to take forever, and it's not really answering the question. And actually my assessor really just wanted to particularly chat about how applicable it was going to be to the district general hospital that was mentioned in my clinical questions, and how useful it would be for my team, and what I could do. So that was where a lot of the focus was. So do make sure that you give some thought time to that, and in that sense it makes it a lot more realistic. It's much more like doing a journal club with your colleagues, thinking, would this work for our local area?
Exactly. And with reference about business cases and QI and things, there's nothing specific on business cases, but there's a station which is kind of logistics and organization. So actually in that you can get thrown anything, and I think, as Anne said, it's a really useful skill to look into and learn about anyway. So under that tab, I think they can talk about service development and provision and QI and business cases. So have a look at, there's really useful resources on Trello for that, and have a chat with your colleagues and consultants you work with on their experience of that, because that's quite useful.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes on to say, as I said, I was really skeptical before I did it, but it really has been so useful. I mean, I just did nights last week and it just felt like one long start scenario after another, and I really feel that I managed things differently and I feel better after having done my start assessments and kind of reflected on it. So it is really, really useful, and I do think something that they have really worked on is the feedback you're given. It really is constructive, whether or not you are above expected standard of a new consultant. There is still kind of specific to you comments, things that they were looking for, things that you can take forwards, kind of pointers. Oh, this is a good guideline to read, or this is a good website to go to. So it is actually really, really useful stuff, and something that I have already referred back to quite a bit. So it's really useful feedback. It took 5.5 weeks for mine to come through. I just got an email saying it's been uploaded to your portfolio, and then it was uploaded to my portfolio, and then I kind of made a meeting contact. I kind of obviously read it, and then made a time to meet with my supervisor, and then have made a kind of start folder, as Dr. Pinto is saying. So yeah, it was 5.5 weeks. I don't know how long yours took, Abby. But...
I think it was similar. It was about a month. There's also now on Kaizen you can make a start PDP, which is a nice way to put it all into one thing. So once you've had a chat with your supervisor, you can sit down and make your development goals kind of based on your feedback, and then link things in directly to those start goals. And yeah, I reiterate what Kate said. It is really useful, quite specific feedback that you're given, and the specific reference to things to read or courses you might want to try. So it's quite nice and useful, because we often don't get such specific and directed feedback from consultants. So it's a good opportunity actually to get that.
Okay, you have lots of questions in the chat. So the first one, they're just saying, if you are a SPIN trainee, will you have any speciality? If you're doing SPIN, will you have speciality stations related to SPIN?
No. You will have kind of general paediatric stations, but it won't be related to your SPIN.
Fine. Okay, thank you. And do you have stop at 6 minutes to ask questions for the next two? I don't think so. Is that right?
No, it really is a conversation, and it's not something I really understood until I did it. And I think it's not like you just go and spout stuff and then they have 2 minutes to grill you and ask you loads of questions. So I think the one tip I would say is that when I get nervous, I like to talk quite fast, and I'm sure lots of other people are the same, and try and slow yourself down and remember that it's a conversation, because they want to find out how you'd approach things and what you know. And if you're going off on a monologue on the wrong track, they'll always try and steer you back, because you do know the stuff. It's how you kind of present it and have your conversation.
Cool, thank you. That's really useful having you guys here with us. So someone else has asked, do you think it's wise to wait for the critical appraisal article and scenario before starting preparation for it because it's 5 days before, or what's your recommendation?
I personally don't think you need to do much prep for the critical appraisal. I would focus on the other areas because you get the article, you can do the preparation within the 5 days, and then it can be more focused on the type of study that you've got and the clinical question. Do you agree, Kate? I think.
I completely agree. I think if it's not something you do regularly or you don't have local journal clubs, then maybe have a look at some of the critical appraisal tools in advance and think, would I like to use? I like the CASP UK ones. They work for me, so I kind of knew when I got the paper through, I'll use this to help me look at the paper. So maybe do that before, but nothing more, I'd say.
Cool, thanks. And then just someone else has asked, hi Abby and Kate, could you please run through the prescribing station in the virtual format?
That's a good question, because I was given a really good tip before the prescribing and handover stations. So this will give me an opportunity to share it with you. So you get given a scenario, and you get given a drug chart as well. And I think there is an example, isn't there, on the RCPCH website? I'm pretty sure I'd seen an example of it there. But you will have a scenario related to this drug chart. So it's not like maybe when you're at med school and you had to just, find the mistake in the paracetamol prescription. There will be an associated scenario with it. And the prescribing will often have something a little bit different, whether it's, I don't know, an immunosuppressant, or the child is obese, or it needs to be done on body surface area and things like that. But really, you then just follow your usual structure of, the name there or the allergies there, and then kind of go through the drug chart and try and answer the clinical questions that are put to you, or the kind of addressing the clinical scenario. The tip I was given for that and the handover station is that if you're like me and not very technologically adept and can't set up kind of multi-screens, it's okay not to have the examiner on video in front of you. You can actually leave the drug chart up in front of you. They don't know that you're not looking at them, and it just means that you can easily reference back to the drug chart and keep talking to your screen, because I'm not very good at flipping between screens. So for me, that really helped. I'm sure it's not what you're meant to do because it is a conversation, but it really helped me, particularly with the prescribing and the handover thing, to just have the information there in front of me while I was talking. I don't know how Abby did it. You're probably much more technologically adept than me.
Oh no, not at all. They might have changed this, but for us, they emailed us the prescribing scenario so we could print it, because I think they had complaints that it was difficult to read. But maybe now they've made it a double station instead, and done it that way. But yeah, I would have done what you did, I think, had I thought of that. It's a good idea. And with the prescribing station, you don't need a BNFC or anything. They give you the drug monograph, so that will have all the information that you need to answer the questions. And it's usually something relatively straightforward with a little twist, like Kate said, and you just talk through the prescription, and then usually there'll be maybe some sort of error or some sort of other governance issue related to it that you talk about as well, so it won't be sort of pure prescribing. And then just to go back to the handover station, that was a station I found quite overwhelming because it's quite a long handover. There's a lot of
really long.
really ridiculous to try and read in 4 minutes. But don't try not to get overwhelmed by that, essentially, because they just want you to be safe and they just want you to pick out the salient points. They know that you can't read everything on the sheet in 4 minutes. So just be structured.
Can't. So I
It's
panicked
impossible
about that, thinking, oh my goodness, I haven't even finished reading it. But actually, what I had done is I guess what everyone does right at the start of a shift. I'd quickly skimmed at it, and I think we're really practiced at doing this. See what you do in your next shifts, but you skim the handover sheet and check for those ones that go, oh, that's leaping out at me, or that's an issue, I'm worried about that patient, and you do that anyway. And actually, I think because I thought, oh, it's an assessment, I need to have read everything. But actually, you don't. You need to do what you would do at the start of every shift, which is skim and pick out the kind of flagging this patient, and also thinking about your team, who you've got around you.
Yeah, exactly. It's just all about flagging, just doing it like a safe handover, picking out the sick patients, the starting patients, the discharges, the team members you're going to use, just planning your day and not worrying about everything that's on the sheet.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Someone's just asked, can you explain your lovely little sheet again? Exactly how that works in terms of timing for people who might not be familiar with this new online format.
As in my timetable?
Yeah, the sheet of paper you had just showed
you
up.
Basically just get sent a list of times saying station 1, and I got told you start your reading time at 13:59, then you connect to the examiner at 14:03, and then you disconnect from the examiner at 14:11. And I found that it was just this long list of times, and I found it a bit overwhelming, so I kind of put it into just a kind of neat table, so I could literally just kind of easily read it and follow it through. So that was all I did. It just worked for me. It might not work for other people. Maybe you just want to print out the email with the times on, but it helped me. But the thing that really helped me was the multi-timer app, which really helped me to be able to have my 4-minute stopwatch followed by my 8 minutes timer. It just helped me keep an eye on the time.
Great, thank you. I had a quick question for you. So I noticed that there isn't a QI station per se. Did they find a way of kind of like sneaking QI stuff in it?
So I think you can use QI, the principles and the process, to answer a lot of the questions. And because in most questions you will be thinking about sort of patient safety, your immediate clinical things, your team, and then you'll be thinking about the wider environment and the wider hospital. And that's about thinking about, how services run, implementing change, and learning from errors, etc. And a lot of the processes by which you do that might be using QI principles. So I think it's nice to work it into certain questions when you're thinking about the wider environment in the hospital, and just showing that you're thinking a little bit more like a consultant and about trying to improve the department and the service. And it won't be specifically, come up with a QI project. It will sort of be hidden within.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Someone's asking, Kate, what was the multi-timer app that you used?
I think it was called Multi-Timer. I just searched for it on the App Store. There are lots of them. I think it's just a way of having a stopwatch. You'll all think I'm mad, but it helped me. It was a crutch.
No, I think these little things are always the things that save us in the end. So yeah, awesome. And someone else is asking, what was your experience about teaching, the teaching station?
This is a bit different, this one, isn't it, Abby? Because it's not just the examiner in there. You have students too.
So it's the only station where you have someone else in there. I just had one student, but I think sometimes
I had 3.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. Which I wasn't expecting. So there you go. Now I thought there would just be 1. So I had 3 students and the examiner.
But I would say with the teaching scenario, just approach it like you would a micro teach on the board. you get, well, we got 3 possibilities of what you could teach. They were all fairly simple, generic things. So I wouldn't worry that you'll get asked to teach on a random syndrome or something that you don't know. It'll all be something that you're all easily familiar with. And bear in mind that you can't teach much in 8 minutes. So what we did when we were practicing is we would just pick between 1 to 3 between 1 to 3 kind of salient points that you want the person to take away, and then make sure you have a really nice structure. And that's my only kind of tip. Some people were interactive in their way they did it, like drew diagrams or used pens or used something. I found that a bit difficult to do virtually, so I just talked and had a structure and checked understanding, etc. And that was fine, and that worked well.
Yeah, I did the same. I kind of felt like it was going to be really difficult to attempt to use kind of teaching aids in a virtual format in such a short period of time. I think the key thing is trying to pick a very small area to teach. You're really only wanting to kind of impart kind of 2, maybe 3 kind of learning points in that time, and a lot of it's about your structure. Mine was a bit different, and I was given like a short kind of clinical scenario. I think it's like a kind of child who's been seen in clinic for this chronic condition, and maybe there were some questions about adherence to medications, but was then being referred on to a tertiary centre for more inputs, but they were also approaching transition time. So they just said, please pick, you've got 3 medical students in clinic with you, please pick any area of this consultation to teach them on. So it was really broad. You could have picked anything really, you know, the condition, a good referral. So there's a lot there. I think the key thing is trying to pick a very, very small area, and then having a structure, which you probably all have your own structure for micro teach already.
Practical question, Kate. With 3 students, were they all in one room together, or did you have 3 screens?
It's a really good question. I had 3 screens. It was, and then the examiner as well.
Cool. Okay, well, I think the chat's gone quiet now, so I think that's probably everyone who's asked all their questions. Any parting words of wisdom that you want to kind of tell us as a goodbye?
I would say just try not to stress out about it. We all do, because it all feels like an exam and it feels like something you need to prepare for. But honestly, once you've done it, you'll think, oh, that was nowhere near as bad as I sort of expected it to be, and it really was like a conversation. So just try and somewhat enjoy just preparing with colleagues, having conversations about interesting topics, and just look into the things you're a little bit more uncertain about. And on the day, just like Kate said, just pace yourself and just make sure you're having a back and forth with the person, and that you've got a little structure in your head of sort of how you want to answer each question, and you'll all be fine. And you don't fail, you just get constructive feedback for certain areas where you could maybe do with some development, and that actually is useful anyway.
Yeah, that's really important. And we do have like a big WhatsApp group for anyone who wants to kind of get involved with preparing for the October heat. I think Kate's been amazing today. She's just quietly working in the background, making everything run so smoothly. She'll post it on the chat for anyone who wants to get involved. So thank you so much, Abby and Kate, and thank you for giving us up your free time and for sharing your words of wisdom. I think that really helps anyway for everyone to just, like you said, feel a little bit more prepared, a little bit more kind of in the know of how to approach it. So we're very grateful.
There is one other question just come up about acute scenarios, and is there anything specific?
From what I remember, the clinical scenarios are quite broad. There's usually, this is for both Kate and I, general pediatrics, but one is usually something a bit more acute. One is neonatal, one is like a chronic complex patient, but all of them, I would say, for me at least, they weren't, the focus wasn't on the clinical aspects necessarily. That was a small part of it, and then there was always some other element like logistical safeguarding, something else.
Yes, so it's not all about your kind of, you know, your clinical management really at all. The emphasis is probably 50-50 on clinical and on all of the kind of other stuff as well, because there will be something else there too.
So don't worry at all about revising clinical material like that you would have used for clinicals. It's not that sort of thing. It'll all be like things you come across day to day.
Okay, thanks. There's one other question. Someone said, and I totally agree with them, the Trello board can sometimes look very overwhelming. Is there any must reads that you would recommend?
I mean, I definitely look over the GMC, all of the GMC stuff. So go through the GMC website. I mean, I know it's stuff we should know, but it wasn't at my fingertips. So that was actually just really useful for me to kind of go back over. And then for me, there was kind of managing a complaint was something that I've never been involved in, and that was really useful to go over that and the kind of and duty of candor stuff as well. So for me, those were the ones that I found really useful.
And I think for me, the going over the SI process and the child bereavement process, both really useful over, and things I wasn't kind of instantly familiar with. That was really helpful. And I think the areas that you probably can't make up and need to know are sort of the ethics and law things. There's not a lot you need to know, but just, you know, remembering Gillett competence, phrase competence, different sections, different mental health sections, and safeguarding like the different sections of that, and child protection, child in need plan, sort of really understanding that process is worth learning and looking at that documentation. But everything else is fairly kind of broad, generic skills, I'd say. So please don't get overwhelmed. There's loads of information there, and I at one point tried to read it all. It's not necessary at all. So just pick up the things that you are not familiar with and just want a little bit more information.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think that's so useful, just having someone who's gone through it all and just giving us their kind of experience and how they approached it. It probably gives everyone a little bit more of a game plan as to how they'll approach the next few weeks. So really, we thank you so much, and thank you for your time. Thank you for giving up your evening to come and chat to us all. Yeah, we really appreciate it. And Kate, thank you also, Kate McKinnon, who's joining us all the way from Scotland. Thank you for being the tech wizard behind the scenes and just doing everything to keep this day flowing. So yeah, without any further,
thank you for coming from Southampton.
Yeah, thank you all.
And post any questions in the WhatsApp group if there's anything we haven't answered that you think of later as well, and use all of the resources that are available. And you'll all do great, so don't worry about it.
You'll do brilliantly. Good luck. Enjoy it.
Bye.